I recently had the privilege of introducing Tiffany Dufu. Many of you in the room know Tiffany. She inherited the White House Project from Marie Wilson. Tiffany is an amazing woman who, after I introduced her, said, sort of the best compliment you can have is to hear someone introduce you and want to get to know that person. And, you know, certainly, Karen, your introduction of me is very generous. I stand on the shoulders of many of the women in this room. And I'm really grateful and honored that I've been invited to talk today. Karen knew me literally when I was in my early 20s. And Karen at the time was the head of NWSA. She too has had, as you know, quite a committed career to equity, inclusion, and diversity. And kind of a pivotal moment was when Karen stood there at the Gay and Lesbian March on Washington holding the NWSA banner and inviting me to hold the banner with her. And her allyship for so many of us has been incredibly extraordinary. So Karen, you know, right back at you. Thank you so much. I also just adore the cross winners. You all are such rock stars. I can hardly wait to see what you're going to do to change up the world in your various fields and encourage you not only to have that impact in your discipline, but I think in higher education what we really need are people who are talking to one another. And so the various perspectives that you bring are very important to the entire enterprise because, as you well know, higher education in this day and age is in need of significant leadership. So as I look to 2030, which I'll talk about in a little bit, I'm going to be looking for some of you. That's 15 years out, so I have high expectations for all of you. So I was talking to my partner about these remarks, and for some reason, red sauce came to her mind. She told me I should talk about my red sauce. And I thought, well, maybe she was just scheming to get me to make my red sauce, you know, or gravy, as my family would call it, which I will say is actually quite terrific. And if you're all staying over and stuck in DC, maybe I should just make a pot this weekend. And, you know, what I like about it is it's actually really good the day after. So this notion to talk about my red sauce simmered in my mind as I considered these remarks, and I wondered how I could use red sauce as a metaphor. And as you can see from the picture behind me, I went with it. So as I think about red sauce, I think about the fact that in most working class Southern Italian American families, no one used a recipe. And, you know, my Nana never used a recipe, and the big joke in my house was that my mother, who is admittedly not a good cook, at one point stood over and around my Nana as she was making her red sauce with measuring spoons and measuring cups to try to figure out the recipe. And, you know, my Nana, she intuited the recipe. She knew the right combinations, she knew the right ingredients, and she played with it. And so as I think about the early higher education leaders who happened to be women, I think in many ways they were like my grandmother. You know, they didn't have a recipe to follow. They worked to find the right combinations, the right ingredients to serve their institutions. You know, there weren't leadership development programs or books on effective leadership or how to lean in and be confident, and there were really no apparent mentorships or sponsorships. There really just wasn't a recipe at that time for women's leadership. And so as many of the social movements of the 60s and 70s progressed, the egregious ways that women were kept from, overlooked for leadership roles in higher education and in other sectors became clearer and clearer. And it was then, I think, that we started to create some of these recipes for women's advancement. So we knew that there were systemic issues. Clearly, there was institutionalized racism, sexism, heterosexism, among the many ways that institutionalized isms present. And it was clear that women and men and women of color and LGBT men and women and others who didn't show up within the norm were clearly not welcome in the academy. They were not welcome in the faculty necessarily, and even less welcome in senior administration. So we created these leadership development programs, and you heard Judith get up here and talk about hers. 1972. We've already heard also about AAC&U's legacy, the Chile classroom climate, Campus Women Lead, all of the efforts that this amazing association has endeavored over the years. My work with them, I think, was some of the first work that was done nationwide through an association to pair women, to really place women of color at the center of the enterprise in higher education. So AAC&U has always done amazing transformative work. You know, I led the National Association for Women in Education, which was founded as the National Association for Deans of Women. Since the late, since 1916, had been doing incredible work to advance women students and women administrators. And then, of course, we know about the work of the ACE Office of Women, so we have this recipe. And the recipe was to gain skills, knowledge, and really tenacity to survive in leadership. So today I would say that, to me at least, the recipe has become a little too measured. So I know that you read all these things too. I read these reports. I sometimes read or often skim these books. There are lots of blogs about leadership thinking. There may be clues or solutions to why women leaders are still so few. And there has recently been this explosion of books, and these are some of them. And it seems to me that as each woman is spooning out this advice for her own recipe for success, I have some questions that I ask myself. I ask, do we or don't we lean in? And if we do lean in, how will we be perceived? And what exactly are we leaning into? Is it that we don't have enough confidence, or chutzpah, or ambition, or drive? Are we not tough enough because nice girls don't get the corner office? And yet, isn't there a message out there too that we're supposed to be nice because we're supposed to be liked? And are these contemporary recipes for leadership for all women or just some women? And I would encourage you to read Bell Hook's critique on Lean In. It is one of the most, I think, powerful critiques, and I actually want to quote from her remarks. She says that, and I'm assuming when I talk about Sandberg, I'm talking about Sheryl Sandberg, okay. Just want to make sure that Sandberg's definition of feminism begins and ends with the notion that it's all about gender equality within the existing social system. From this perspective, the structures of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy need not be challenged. And she makes it seem that privileged white men will eagerly choose to extend the benefits of corporate capitalism to white women who have the courage to lean in. It almost seems as if Sandberg sees women's lack of perseverance as more the problem than systemic inequality. And I agree, there is deep systemic inequality. One of the things I get to do is I'm on the national board of the Girl Scouts of the United States. And our CEO, Ana Marie Chavez, led this campaign to ban bossy, right? Because it was an effort to call out the fact that when boys are called leaders, they're leaders, and when girls are leaders, they're called bossy. And so boys stay in and girls opt out. And this is indicative of this culture, this system that creates white as the norm, male as the norm, and female and those of color as outside the norm. So the recipe for women's advancement, I would ask you, are the right ingredients to be found in these books? These books, like my mother's attempt to replicate my Nana's red sauce recipe with measuring cups and spoons, are, at least for me, a little too prescriptive. It's not just our fault. Many of us push forward every single day. We are mission-driven, and we're student-focused. We understand the importance of equity, inclusion, and diversity. And we know that we have a role in making higher education accessible at all levels. Most of us have confidence. And balance, well, try daily negotiation around a host of tasks that are never balanced. So is the lack of advancement for women our fault? Because there is still a significant lack of advancement. Literally this week, ACE just released this info brief called Pipelines, Pathways, and Institutional Leadership. This info brief is a follow-up to the academia section of the 2013 Benchmarking Women's Leadership in the United States report. And I'm going to move quickly through some points, and this is available on the ACE website. If you go to our homepage, you can click right to the report to get a copy of the PDF. So the pipeline myth, the persistent idea that there are too few qualified women for leadership positions. That, my friends, still exists. So here are the most current data on educational attainment for women. And I would say that most significant is the 2006 statistic that indicates that women now are the majority of those who have the earned doctorate. Glass ceilings, you do remember this term. The long-standing metaphor for the intangible systemic barriers that prevent women from obtaining senior leadership position. So in this slide, we look at women in the professoriate. And at the bottom right, you will note the following. Women of color often outnumber men of color in lower-ranking faculty positions, but men of color hold full professor positions more often than women of color. Again, as we disaggregate the data, which I always encourage us to do, we can't just talk about women. When we disaggregate data around pay equity, we have to remember that white women are different than African American women who earn, I believe it is 69 cents on the dollar, and Latinas who earn 57 cents on the dollar. This is not about the USA Today quick fix. We have to keep pulling apart the data. The higher, the fewer. Recognizing the fact that even though women have higher educational attainment levels than men, there are few women at the senior ranks in faculty and in administration as well. I don't know if you can read that in the back. It essentially says that male faculty members held a higher percentage of tenure positions at every type of institution, even though they did not hold the highest number of faculty positions at every rank. The pay gap. No matter what academic rank, men earn more than women and are more likely to hold a tenure-track position, as I just stated. In fact, and this to me was really sobering, because I have to tell you, this has been work of lifetimes, not just my lifetime, but other lifetimes and lifetimes before us. When you look at IPED's data, and you look at the average salary of full-time, 9-month instructional faculty, the gap between men and women has actually grown. In 1975-76, it was $3,106. That was the gap. Today, 2013-2014, for my detail people, $15,173. There also have been studies that do disaggregate the data around discipline because often the argument is, well, there are more men in engineering, although one of our cross scholars would, maybe take some issue with that. But regardless, those gaps still exist. So let's talk about senior administration and boards. Presidents, 27%. Now, I will tell you, as we look at across sectors, because our benchmarking study that we conducted at Colorado Women's College looked at 14 sectors, higher education is in the lead at 27%. Corporate sector is still 4%. Chief academic officers. Now, you know that for women, often, we have to follow much more traditional routes up the administrative food chain, if you will, in order to move into the presidency. I think women are pushing against that in really important ways, but still, that is the path. And so the fact that at public doctoral degree granting institutions, we're actually seeing a decline in the number of chief academic officers who are women is a bit of a warning bell for me. Governing boards. We know that governing boards are the groups that have the influence over who leads an institution and who gets to stay at the institution. I mean, presidents talk about this conundrum of how do they manage boards and students and faculty and who, on any given day, how are they managing the various constituencies that they must keep close. But governing boards, 2-to-1, still. You talk about there have been so many efforts to get women onto corporate boards. I want to work with all of you to launch an effort to get women onto college and university boards. Why are we just focusing on corporate boards? Okay, let me not go off on that tangent. So ACE, along with many other organizations, including some of the organizations represented in this room today, has been working on an initiative called Moving the Needle. And last week, we actually launched a campaign that's a call to action. And so any college or university president who's in this room today, if you have not signed our call to action, I invite you to do so. We are asking presidents to sign on to commit to moving women into gender parity in the college and university presidency. The goal is, thank you, I think it's worth clapping about. The goal is that by 2030, we will have 50% of the college and university presidencies occupied by women, which is where I get back to my cross scholars in the 15 years you have to kind of step up into some spaces here. But then, and I can't help but laugh at this because, after all, feminists do have a sense of humor, and I find that I have to laugh a lot. So it was interesting. So last week we launched the Moving the Needle call to action, and then we sent out this infographic, which I'm sure, if there was a stronger drink than orange juice at your table, some of you might be indulging in after looking at those statistics yet again, if that's something that you do. So we did a press release, and so yesterday morning, a few days after launching its campaign to see half of college chief executives to be women by 2030, ACE put out an infographic showing just how far they have to go. So I think that's ironic, right? Because there is this sense, and I was talking to one of the cross scholars who said that one of the reasons that she decided to move from practice inside of NGO work into academia and looking at the issue of human dignity and justice is that she thought that perhaps in the classroom she could begin to open up these conversations with students, many of whom believe that women have made it. And so, it's always this interesting balance, right, between the enthusiasm that we want to have for the work, for knowing that things are changing, and we are starting to see different people occupy college and university presidencies and chief academic officer positions. But, the imperative around the statistics is important to keep repeating and to keep saying over and over again, because the numbers are telling a different story than the narrative that we keep hearing about, oh dear, why are you worried about this? Everything is just fine. So, I would ask the question, is it our fault? And I would say it's not. So when I make my red sauce today, I combine my Nana's wisdom and intuition with my mother's measurements. So I have, and I have faded yellow index cards, I kid you not, that I wrote my mother's recipe on. And it's in my good Catholic school cursive. And I just moved here a little while ago, and I actually had to climb up this morning because I thought I should show you evidence. Like, I am not kidding. And it's really interesting because the tomato sauce is, for 1 pound of macaroni, because we don't call it pasta, we call it macaroni, 4 8-ounce cans of tomato sauce, a half each with water, 2 6-ounce cans of tomato paste, salt and pepper, oregano, basil leaf, onion browned, cover off to thicken. That's not my recipe. But I will tell you, it's like holding on to a blanket, right, when I make my red sauce, because I take this as the foundation and then I play with it. So as I was writing these remarks, and I was thinking about my own leadership journey, and I also have had the really amazing good fortune of watching so many women in this room today and their leadership journeys. And I would say there is no doubt that the pipeline is full, that the glass ceiling exists, and we still have far to go. And there are, in fact, the fewer, the higher that we go. We know that we simmer in environments that are not designed for us or for our leadership. In our work, just like being at the stove making the red sauce, we literally manage the heat, and we stay until we're able to make our own leadership sauce. I've been mentored and sponsored by amazing women. Cynthia Secor, Blenda Wilson, Stephanie Bennett, Anna Chavez, Donna Shavlik, Linda Eisenman, and as you heard earlier, my friend Karen. So as I close, let me ask you these questions. How far back are each of you reaching? To whom are you reaching? And who are you sharing your recipe with? So last night, I got on the phone with Heather Johnson. Heather is this very bright millennial who is the author of the info brief that I just showed you. So Heather came to ACE this summer as a research intern, and she reached out to me because she's really committed to leadership development in higher education. And, it's a big risk for the Heathers of this world to approach those of us who now hold these senior leadership roles. The academy is so tightly constructed and hierarchical. And for younger women to be able to reach through those barriers and those systems to us is nothing short of an extraordinary move. So I will tell you, I love and admire this young woman. She has courage that I never possessed. She has a JD and she's working on a PhD. Pat Lowry, she's at Michigan State. She proudly presents in very non-gender normed ways, and I have always passed. She inspires me, and now we're collaborators. I sent this talk to her last night, and I said, I need you to read it. I need you to tell me if I've hit the right points. I need you to make sure that I've remembered to be as inclusive as I know I need to be. And, you know, she reminded me about so many aspects of the work that we've elevated today. And she said to me, Lynn, you cannot leave without saying to everyone in this room, you have got to reach back to us. We are the future. We understand this work. We actually, some of us are deeply immersed in this work, and you need to let our voices come through. So as I look at the recipe for today's leadership journey, and I decided to take a picture of my recipes, you can see they are pretty dog-eared and well-worn. You know, I think of it as combining wisdom and intuition with foundational and measured effort. It's about recognizing the realities of systemic barriers with the knowledge that each of us must continue our work to advance ourselves and other women, all other women. It's about taking that dog-eared, cursive-written recipe for our leadership red sauce and give it to the next younger woman, like the way my Nana's red sauce has now moved through generations, and I hold these yellowed cards today. So I close by saying, to whom will you pass your recipe? Thank you.